I've been working on these videos for so long, I already have updates for the first one. So first up, the November patch is coming on the 13th. With it, we'll get the abyssal changes in the new precursor ships, fax changes, ECM buffs, navigation structures, plus a bunch of little stuff. Check out the patch notes if you want to know more. Also, Tetra Pak 24 left a comment stating that CCP already released the 0-point mass entangler for wormhole rolling. The mass entangler severely reduces speeds and prevents warping, so that should prevent any abuses. Anyway, thanks to Tetra Pak 24 for getting me up to speed. Also, Suetonia started posting videos for T1 microwarp drive kiting cruisers, which can handle up to Tier 3 filaments. Low-skill players will probably struggle with fitting, cap, and/or putting out enough DPS to complete the sights on time, but it can definitely help mid-skill players to nab Tier 3 loot and to get into the proving grounds in cheap, disposable ships. So definitely check his videos out. Links for them and everything else down below. As I'm sure you guys have already heard by now, we're getting new structures. In short, they are small, specialized, rapidly deployed, and more easily destroyed. The first set to be released will revolve around navigation, but more on that in a moment. Anchoring will take minutes or hours, with the structure being vulnerable throughout the deployment period. They will also have most of the normal location restrictions, except now they can be deployed within weapon ranges of other upwell structures. They're also going to be too small to support docking. Instead, they can be boarded like a ship. Fuel can be deposited by anyone, and they'll have normal access control lists, so you'll be able to make whitelist, blacklist, or make them open to the public. Also, the ACL should give you the ability to set different usage fees for different groups. Flex structures with an active service module will have one reinforcement timer in between armor and hull. Those in low power will have none and can be destroyed in a single session. Once again, navigation structures will be the first to be released. They'll come with a permanently fitted service module that uses fuel as normal. It also doesn't look like they can fit anything else, so no stand-up layered armor platings. Anyway, onlining the service module will require the corresponding iHub upgrade. It won't matter who owns it, but it will give defenders a way to offline hostile structures. They will be limited to conquerable nullsec when first released, but Lebowski mentioned that they may be expanded into other spaces. Of course, I couldn't tell you how that would work without iHubs. Perhaps there'll be some upwell infrastructure structures. The Sino Beacon and Sino Jammer should be relatively self-explanatory. They have the same functionality of their POS equivalents, but are governed by the previously mentioned flex structure mechanics. Other than that, the Sino Jammer can have up to 3 deployed per system, but only one can be online at a time. It will also be able to be toggled on and off at will, but it will have a 5-minute spool-up time. Okay, the 2 big features of the jump gate that have people talking are 1, that there are no ship size restrictions, and 2, that there is no jump fatigue. Now, I know that no one likes space aids, but that will certainly have consequences. Indeed, the ancient gamer noob brought up the 2 Eyes of Terror, which were strings of jump bridges that allowed the goons to fire hose their enemies with a stream of ships. That being said, these gates will also allow for rapid deployment across one's own space, and not just for the Alliance, but the whole coalition. Thus, allies will have increased mobility, fires can be more easily put out, and reinforcements will be able to quickly move to and between fronts. So, I don't know. I'm not an expert on such matters, but I think I do agree with the people who say that it won't last. If this results in people taking a beating, they'll cry for change, and if CCP sees low player metrics because of that, there's a good chance that they're going to listen. Thus, I think that they will probably get jump fatigue at some point, but we might see some massive battles before that happens. Oh, and definitely check out the Ancient Gaming Noob's article on the subject. It's definitely worth a read. Anyway, max of 1 gate per system, 5 light-year range, and only 2 gates being able to be linked at a time. The service module will require fuel blocks, and ships will require liquid ozone, the amount of which will depend on their mass. Owners may also set a toll, which is scaled to the amount of liquid ozone consumed. One nice thing about that, however, is that you can set up an auto-pay option for whenever the fee is under whatever threshold you set. The November patch will also see a tweak to the tank and life cycle of other structures. Base armor and shield HP will be reduced by 62.5%, but full power structures will get a 4 times multiplier to compensate. The end result is that full power structures will have the same tank, but those in low power will have approximately 25% less. Not only that, but armor platings will no longer give them a bonus, and they will only have one reinforcement period in between armor and hull. And further down the pipe, we'll see propaganda structures, which can be used to advertise, recruit, talk smack, and whatever. I'm curious to how big and prominent they will be. Like, would it have a massive billboard where you could show your alliance ad, or be able to display custom messages like, "Goons can suck on my everlasting cockstopper"? I also think it'd be cool if you could load them with fireworks in order to help draw players' attention to them, and it would give more value to all those fireworks that drop during events. So, we already have the stand-up festival launcher, so I don't think it'd be too difficult to do. The only problem would be in trying to set up some sort of automatic firing process. Personally, I would like to see proximity triggers so that fireworks fire whenever a player gets within a certain distance, but I suppose that being able to set a firing frequency could work as well. Anyway, there's also talk about tying them into war decks in some way, so we'll see how that works. And finally, we'll be seeing structure skins and forward operating bases. CCP Lebowski was rather vague when it came to the FOBs, and I think it was because they still haven't figured out the details themselves. So get ready for some wild speculation. Well, we do know that they're going to be smaller and have less functionality than Citadels. Past that, it's probably safe to assume that their characteristics will be a mashup of Citadels and pauses, and that's because they're supposed to replace the ability of a pause to help people establish toeholds in hostile space. So first up, I'd imagine that they would have an anchor time that is closer to that of a pause. Obviously, however, the more powerful and robust they are, the longer their deployment timer should be. I'd also imagine that, like a pause, they won't support docking. Now, I do like that idea, but I would really like to see some sort of feature that could prevent accidental and intentional bumping. Otherwise, you're probably going to see a lot of annoying shenanigans. I don't know how hard it would be to do, but perhaps they could have some sort of hard tether system which could immobilize ships and support up to a certain amount of ships or mass per fob, and larger fobs could support more mass. Anyway, I really don't think that they should support docking, but if they do, it should probably be limited. Like perhaps they could only support ships up to frigs, decies, or cruisers depending on size, and have anchoring times that reflect those abilities. Services would definitely need to include refitting and storage. Preferably, they would have several different fleet hangars, or even better, one large fleet hangar and the ability to partition it to custom sizes. I also think it'd be cool if you could use ACLs to control access in order to help guard against thieves and saboteurs, but I suppose they could work like normal fleet hangars as well. Now, a big question is whether they should have clone services or not. Of course, that would represent a huge increase in power, so I'd rather that service be restricted to the larger structures. If they do get cloning, and I'm not saying that they should, but if they do get it, it should probably be limited in some way, like in total number of supported players or something. Also, if you have any opinions on this or anything else in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Anyway, I don't think that it'd be unreasonable to give them some sort of offensive capability. I mean, Doomsdays might be a little much, but things like missile launchers, nukes, and webs would be nice. Finally, I think it's pretty safe to assume that FOBs will have a tank that lies somewhere in between the navigation structures and the Osterhus. Thus, the question is where exactly that would be. I'm thinking that one reinforcement timer would be appropriate, but that they should also have a more substantial tank than the navigation structures. I mean, a base of operations in hostile space probably shouldn't be squishy, but I don't want to see them be a chore to kill either, especially since they will likely anchor fast and be relatively inexpensive. Speaking of which, I definitely think that you should be able to kill low power FOBs in one go. Alright, I guess that's enough speculating for now. Pauses might end in 2019, but that shouldn't happen before we get FOBs. Also, I remember hearing somewhere that there will be some sort of buyback program, so don't worry about getting stuck with a bunch of useless stuff when they die. Alright, coming this December, wars will only be able to be declared against players with structures. Apparently, the player metrics were so bad that they decided to push this change ASAP and then follow it up with a rework in award decks later. Regardless, if any corp in an alliance owns a structure, then it will open up the whole alliance to a war deck. This will apply at least to the upwell structures and POCOs, but they're not sure about the pauses yet, as they may just make that a suspect level offense. Anyway, CCP is still hammering out the details, but they do seem to have a pretty good grip on the needs of various community groups, so I wouldn't freak out if you're a high-sec PvPer. First up, they are going to preserve mutual war decks, so groups like Red versus Blue have nothing to worry about. Other things that they are looking at is tying propaganda structures into war decks, providing goals for attackers and defenders, and making sure that noobs and casuals know what's going on and why. They also want to make it so that wars increase engagement, but we'll see how well they do with that. I mean, convincing players not to turtle when they are being assaulted by groups that clearly outclass them isn't going to be easy. One thing that concerns me, however, is that I think this system will disincentivize a lot of smaller, poor, and less experienced groups from deploying structures. And I'm sure a lot of you are already banging away on your keyboard to say that they need to get good. If they can't defend them, they shouldn't deploy them. And that isn't an unreasonable assertion. It is certainly in keeping with the hardcore nature of Eve. On the other hand, mechanics that encourage players to get into structures might also result in an increase in player investment and help transition them into more competent and hardcore players. I haven't seen the metrics, but based upon casual observation, I believe that structure ownership is a good thing. It gives people goals to work on, assets to maintain and protect, and something to get excited about. Unfortunately, however, I haven't been able to come up with a decent proposal. Everything I've brainstormed so far either makes structures too safe or too at risk thanks to workarounds. I mean, whether it be for ISK or fun, it's pretty clear that E players love punching down, and I don't think telling them to pick on someone their own size is going to work. Regardless, I think CCP is moving in the right direction, and I am looking forward to see what they ultimately come up with. Whether this affects you directly or not, the experience of new players does play a big role in getting them hooked, and therefore it plays a big role in the health of the player population. Moreover, this stuff may very well affect you if you create alts. In short, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the new player stuff because I think it affects everyone in one way or another. Plus, I just personally find it interesting. The first problem involves skill training, which can be broken into 3 parts. First, progression is rather slow for new players. Their SP per hour is low, they're missing most prerequisites and support skills, and the weight is made worse by the fact that they have fewer ships to fly. Second, there are a crap ton of skills, which can leave players scratching their heads about what they should be training. Finally, bad remaps can result in new bros essentially breaking their characters. Alright, I need to make this video any longer by going on a tangent, but bear with me. I once read an article about an airport in Houston receiving a bunch of complaints about baggage wait times. They added more baggage handlers and checked their equipment, but the complaints just kept coming in. They ended up solving the problem by moving the baggage claim farther away from the terminals, which meant the passengers spent more time walking and less time waiting. Complaints dropped off. So, why do I bring this up? Because progression for new players is definitely slow, but it's also a matter of perception. Remember being a new bro and seeing an 8-day train and thinking it was absolutely ridiculous? And nowadays, that's nothing. There's probably multiple reasons for this change in perspective, but for one, we already have several ships that we like flying, which helps to keep us busy, and 2 is probably the anchor and bias. I mean, after multiple 20 to 30 day skill trains, 8 days is a relief. Regardless, I bring all of this up not just to say that there's more than one way to skin a cat, but also to point out that the solution might not actually need to speed up progression, just make the wait seem less painful. All of that being said, I think progression should be sped up for new players. Indeed, lots of MMOs speed up progression for new players as they age. For one, older players creating alts don't want to grind forever to reach endgame content, and 2, newer players have the base game plus all the expansions to chew through. Thus, the devs don't have to artificially restrict their ability to progress through it all and run out of things to do. Of course, the vast majority of content in Eve comes through PvP and not theme park stuff, so that doesn't really apply here. Instead, CCP needs to worry about 2 things. 1, making sure that players always have something to work towards, and 2, how changes will affect their bottom line. And let's face it, slow progression is a major incentive to create alts and pay for extra subscriptions. The problem with that, however, we already mentioned, and that's that progression is painfully slow when starting out. So let's start by looking at some of the solutions tossed around at the CSM and then I'll add a few of my own. So Aerith mentioned that attributes should be leveled out and that all players should train at 2700 SP an hour, which I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, this will definitely help new bros and casual players along, but on the other, this system has also given me an advantage. I'm well ahead of the curve for my age, which has been partially thanks to accelerators and injectors, but also to neural remaps and long-term skill plans. In other words, a little bit of research and planning has given me an advantage that I would prefer not to lose. This could work in several ways, but CCP Affinity is interested in having players train unallocated SP, which could then be applied to the skill of their choice. This would allow players to train without having a clear plan up front. Of course, this should help out really young players who might be overwhelmed by all the choices, but I think that most players develop a laundry list of things that they want to train rather quickly. In short, this might benefit some players, but it still leaves the other problems untouched. Besides, checking in on skill queues might help to retain players who take breaks. Like, I remember at least one of my breaks ended up being cut short because I had logged on to add to my skill queues, hopped on comms, and started talking to some of my friends. I mean, I will always come back to Eve, but I've seen other players take breaks and never come back. So, it's probably rather important to do everything possible to keep the hooks in. Moving on, Sword Dragon mentioned that players should just get more SP, which is something CCP has done in the past. I think it was a few years ago that they upped the starting SP from around 50k to 400,000. However, CCP Affinity says that testing has indicated that progression is a factor which helps to pull players in, which, of course, any RPG fan could have probably told him. Regardless, I think I agree with Affinity. The last thing that we want is for new players to open up the skill window and see nothing but multi-day trains. Alright, Sword Dragon also brought up how new characters can tank their skill training rates with bad neural remaps. However, I think that there are a couple ways to fix the issue without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. One way is to allow characters under 1 year or so to always have the option to reset to default attributes. Yes, they will have wasted a remap, but it gets them back to par and it limits how much players creating alts can gain this safety net. Of course, a more interesting option might be to have remaps cost plex and have that cost scale exponentially if they try to do them too frequently. For example, the first remap of the year could be 25 plex, the second 75, the third 225, and so on, and then have the cost reset every year. This could create additional revenue for CCP, give players the option of not having to commit to year-long skill plans, and deter new bros from making hasty decisions. Personally, I would rather that it cost ISK, as that would create an additional ISK sink and not cause the price of Plex to spike, but I'd understand if CCP went with the revenue generating option. Anyway, I don't think that there would be any backlash if remaps started costing ISK. Yes, they are currently free, but giving players the option to remap multiple times a year would probably go over well. Charging Plex, however, might piss some people off. However, I think that if CCP set a fair price and allowed the characters created before the change to keep their existing bonus remaps, that would go a long way towards helping the change be perceived as a good one for the players. Alright, let's talk progression. First, I actually think it would be a great idea to drop certain ship, weapon, and ammo skill requirements for subcaps to level 4. This would allow new bros to get into T2 ships, guns, and ammo faster and remove some of the nastier skill trains, but it would also still allow for older players to retain the other benefits of all their rank 5 skills. And there has been a precedent for this as well, as CCP has lowered the requirements for certain stuff in the past. For example, advanced weapon upgrades used to require weapon upgrades 5. But let's look at the Ishtar to clarify exactly what I mean. Dropping the Galanti Cruiser skill requirement from 5 to 4 will reduce the skill train for a brand new Omega from 62 to 38 days. And weapons could work the same way. Medium T2 blasters, railguns, Void, and Null would all require the same skills, save that instead of requiring medium hybrid turret 5, they would now only require it to level 4. I know this might seem like an extreme reduction, but new bros would still have to train all their drone, tanking, and support skills in order to fly the ship competently. Thus, they'd still have plenty of skill training to do, just not quite as much to get into all those fun and exciting ships. Moreover, players who have already trained Galente Cruiser 5 and whatnot would still retain their ISK efficiency and PvP advantage over those who had. Of course, this solution would open up a lot of T2 ships to a lot of players, and therefore it would probably put some downward pressure on faction ship prices. This would be great for consumers, but it could also reduce the value of loyalty points. So, not only is that something to consider, but it also demonstrates how changing one thing can create all sorts of tangential ramifications. I've seen people complain about how slow CCP moves sometimes, but I am glad when they take the time to consider all the unintended consequences. Alright, that's it for now. Don't forget to support all your favorite content creators, and until next time, fly smart.